In a city where justice is often drowned out by whispers of corruption, one woman's unshakable resolve becomes a beacon of hope. Emma Carter, a brilliant civil rights attorney, has built her life on the belief that truth, when fought for, can change everything. But when her hard-earned success is met with suspicion and hostility, Emma finds herself pulled into a web far more dangerous than she ever imagined. What begins as a confrontation with a rogue officer spirals into the unraveling of a powerful hidden network. As Emma uncovers layers of deceit, bribes, and cover-ups, she becomes a target. Threats invade her home, her safety is compromised, and her family is drawn into a battle they never asked for. But Emma refuses to back down. Instead, she chooses to fight back with the truth as her weapon. In a story filled with suspense, courage, and sacrifice, Emma must navigate not only legal battles, but also the shadows lurking in her personal life. As the stakes rise, so do the dangers, and the question becomes, how far will she go to seek justice for those who have been silenced? Will she break under the weight of the system, or will her resilience spark a movement that cannot be stopped? Join us as we follow Emma's journey, a relentless pursuit of truth in the face of fear, and a powerful reminder that even in the darkest times, one voice can light the way. The afternoon sun shimmered over the quiet street as Emma Carter guided her black Tesla into a parking spot outside an upscale boutique. The car's sleek finish caught the light, turning heads as she stepped out. Emma adjusted her blazer and brushed a hand over her soft curls. The steady rhythm of her heels clicking on the pavement was a quiet reminder of how far she had come. For years, Emma had fought her way to the top late nights in law libraries, relentless courtroom battles, and countless hours in community meetings. Now, as a respected civil rights attorney, she had built a reputation for taking on cases no one else dared to touch. Her career had become a symbol of resilience, but success did not erase the subtle tensions that came with it. As she reached for the boutique's glass door, a sharp voice cut through the calm. "Excuse me, ma'am." Emma turned to see a uniformed officer standing near the curb. His name tag read Daniels, and his arms were crossed as he eyed her Tesla. "That's quite the car for someone like you," he said, his voice laced with an unmistakable accusation. Emma felt the familiar weight of his words settle in her chest. She had seen this before, the unspoken assumption that she did not belong here. Her gaze stayed level as she responded, "I wasn't aware that neighborhoods like this had a dress code." Daniels stepped forward, his badge glinting in the sunlight. "We've had reports of stolen vehicles in the area. Is this your car?" Emma held her ground, her heartbeat steady. "It is," she answered calmly. "Do you have proof of ownership?" Daniels smirked, as though already doubting her. Emma opened her handbag and pulled out a slim leather folder, handing it to him. Daniels flipped through the documents with a detached air. He barely glanced at the registration. "Forgery's not uncommon," he muttered, handing the papers back with a shrug. Emma's patience was wearing thin, but she kept her voice steady. "Would you like to see the dealership receipt as well?" Daniels ignored her. He walked around the Tesla, running his hand along its side as though inspecting it for flaws. Finally, he turned back to Emma. "I'm impounding the vehicle until we can confirm it's not stolen." The words hit like a slap. Emma inhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay composed. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice low and calm. Daniels grinned, relishing the moment. "Step aside, ma'am." Emma stepped back, her heels clicking against the pavement. Daniels slid into the driver's seat and revved the engine. The Tesla's quiet hum turned into a low growl as he pulled out of the spot and drove away. Emma stood still, watching until the car disappeared around the corner. A wave of frustration tightened her chest, but she had learned long ago that outbursts accomplished nothing. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. The line connected after one ring. "It's me," Emma said quietly. He took the bait. There was a brief pause before a calm voice responded. Understood. Activating the next step. Emma hung up and looked at the boutique door. The reflection of the street shimmered in the glass. She straightened her shoulders and walked inside, her steps sure and unhurried. The storm had only begun, but this time she would be ready. The interior of the Tesla was silent, except for the soft hum of the navigation system. Officer Daniels leaned back in the driver's seat, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. A self-satisfied grin spread across his face as he cruised through the streets. The power beneath his hands felt intoxicating proof, in his mind, that he had the upper hand. The luxury of the car was undeniable. The leather seats, the smooth dashboard, the barely audible engine hum. Daniels let out a low whistle. "They think they can get away with anything," he muttered, glancing at his reflection in the rearview mirror. But as he turned down a quiet road, the dashboard chimed, and a message flashed across the screen. Unauthorized user detected. Activating security protocol. Daniels frowned, tapping the screen as though it was a simple glitch. "What is this?" he muttered. The Tesla began to slow on its own. The accelerator was unresponsive beneath his foot. Panic flashed in his eyes as the wheel stiffened in his grip. The car made a sharp right, steering itself off the main road and down an empty side street lined with abandoned warehouses. "Come on," Daniels growled, yanking the wheel with both hands. But the car was in complete control. The Tesla came to a smooth but abrupt stop in front of a sprawling, deserted warehouse. The locks clicked, sealing the doors shut. Daniels pushed at the handle, but the door would not budge. His breaths came in shallow bursts as he pounded his fist against the glass. The dashboard screen lit up again. Exit authorized. The locks released with a quiet click. Daniels hesitated before shoving the door open. He stumbled out, wiping the sweat from his brow. The silence around him was deafening. Then he heard footsteps measured and deliberate. Emma Carter stepped into view, her silhouette sharp against the golden glow of the setting sun. She wore the same composed expression she had earlier, but this time her eyes burned with quiet intensity. Behind her, two men in suits approached. One carried a sleek tablet, its screen displaying a live feed from the Tesla's interior. Daniels's cocky grin faltered. "What is this?" he demanded. Emma stopped a few feet away, her arms folded. "You should already know," she said. Her voice was calm, yet it held the weight of something unbreakable. Daniels clenched his jaw, trying to regain his composure. "I don't have to explain myself to you." Emma tilted her head slightly. "No, you don't," she said, "but you will explain yourself to a judge." One of the men stepped forward, tapping the screen. The tablet began playing a recording, a clear video of Daniels's interaction with Emma earlier. His condescending remarks, the unnecessary seizure of the car, and every word dripping with disdain played back in sharp detail. Daniel's face turned pale as the sound of his own voice echoed through the warehouse yard. Forgery's not uncommon. Emma's voice cut through the silence. "This isn't about just me, Officer Daniels. It's about every person you've humiliated, every person you've unlawfully detained, profiled, or robbed of their dignity." Daniels let out a bitter laugh, though it came out weak. "You can't prove anything beyond that one incident." Emma took a step forward and held up a thick folder. "This file contains reports and complaints from people you thought wouldn't fight back, witness statements, records of your actions. You didn't just make a mistake today. You've built a career on them." Daniels's bravado crumbled. He shifted his weight, his eyes darting between Emma and the two men standing behind her. His voice dropped, desperate now. "Come on, let's be reasonable. No one's perfect." Emma's expression did not waver. "You didn't make mistakes, Daniels. You made choices, and now you're going to face the consequences." Daniels' shoulders sagged as the weight of her words pressed down on him. He opened his mouth to respond, but closed it again when one of the men stepped forward. "The Department of Internal Oversight has already been notified." the man said. "You'll be answering to more than just one court." Daniel's hands shook as two more officials approached from the other end of the lot. Emma watched silently as he was taken into custody, his protests drowned out by the sound of handcuffs clicking shut. The sun dipped lower on the horizon as the officers led Daniels away. Emma felt the moment settle in her chest, a small but significant victory. She exhaled slowly, letting the weight lift. As the quiet returned, the man with the tablet spoke. "We got everything?" Emma nodded. "Every word." Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen. It was Alex Rivera, her trusted investigator. She answered the call as she walked back toward her Tesla, now restored and waiting for her. "Alex," she said. "We've connected more names to Daniel's circle," Alex said without preamble. His voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of urgency. "This goes higher than we thought." Emma's steps slowed. The evening breeze brushed against her face, but she barely felt it. "How high?" Alex paused. "You need to see it for yourself. I'll meet you at the office in an hour." Emma's grip on the phone tightened. "I'm on my way." She ended the call and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine purred softly as she pulled onto the road, heading back toward the heart of the city. The road ahead stretched long and uncertain, but Emma knew one thing for sure: this fight was far from over. Emma Carter's office was bathed in the soft glow of desk lamps as the city skyline stretched beyond the windows. The weight of the recent confrontation with Officer Daniels sat heavy on her shoulders. But there was no time to reflect. She had always known that the fight for justice was complex, a long road filled with hidden traps. Yet, as she reviewed the files laid out before her, a deeper realization took root. This was not just about Daniels. The elevator chimed in the hallway, and Emma looked up as the door to her office opened. Alex Rivera stepped inside, a weathered messenger bag slung over his shoulder. His expression was serious, his usual calm demeanor tinged with urgency. "Emma," he greeted, placing a thick manila folder on her desk. "You need to see this." Emma gestured for him to sit, though her eyes were already scanning the folder. The first page was a printed spreadsheet, names, dates, case numbers. "What am I looking at?" she asked, though dread stirred in her chest. Alex leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "These are reports tied to Daniels, but they go far beyond him. We're talking falsified arrests, illegal property seizures, missing evidence. And Daniels isn't working alone." Emma's pulse quickened as she flipped to the next page. It was a detailed memo with highlighted notes tracing payments between several officers and a private third-party security firm. She looked up sharply. "Bribes?" Alex nodded. "And worse, they've built a network, a safety net for corrupt officers. The people on this list protect each other, cover for each other. Complaints disappear. Dashcam footage gets lost." Emma's hand rested on the thick folder as a cold reality settled over her. Daniels wasn't an anomaly. He was part of something bigger. "This isn't just corruption," Emma said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's an operation." Alex's gaze softened as he watched her absorb the gravity of the situation. "I know you've handled tough cases, but this one, it's dangerous. These people are powerful, and they've kept themselves hidden for a reason." Emma leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking softly beneath her. She had always prepared herself for challenges, but this felt like unraveling a web that had been spun over years. "They've already started retaliating," Alex added. "One of our whistleblowers backed out this morning. He got a visit from someone who made it clear his family wasn't safe." Emma's jaw clenched. She felt the familiar stirrings of anger, but she pressed it down, staying composed. "Then we make sure the others stay safe," she said. Alex hesitated before he spoke again. "That's not all." He pulled out another document, a map with pins marking different locations across the city. "These are addresses linked to the officers in this network. But look here." He pointed to a red marker near Emma's neighborhood. Her heart sank. They're watching my house? Alex nodded grimly. They're not being subtle about it either. It's intimidation. Emma stood pacing to the window. The familiar view of the city stretched before her, but tonight it felt different, more vulnerable. The weight of responsibility settled over her like a heavy cloak. You should consider stepping back, Alex said gently. Let the legal team handle the next moves while you stay out of the spotlight for a while. Emma turned, her expression resolute. You know I can't do that. If I step back, they'll think they've won, and more people will suffer in silence. Alex sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I figured you'd say that. He rose to his feet, his eyes meeting hers. At least promise me you'll tighten your security. I'll contact private security firms if I have to. Emma nodded, though her mind was already moving ahead. We'll need to contact the whistleblowers and make sure they're relocated if necessary. And Alex, thank you. Alex gave a small nod. We're in this together. As he left the office, Emma sat back down, her gaze drifting over the files spread before her. Each page was a story of betrayal, families torn apart by wrongful convictions, homes raided under false pretenses, livelihoods destroyed. She reached for her phone and called her sister, Grace. The phone rang twice before Grace answered. Hey, Em, Grace greeted, her voice warm. Are you home? Emma asked. I just got in, Grace said. Everything okay? Emma hesitated. She didn't want to worry her sister, but she could not ignore the growing danger. Just be careful, Grace, she said softly. Grace's tone shifted, concern replacing the lightheartedness. Is this about your case? Emma forced a reassuring tone. It's nothing immediate. I'm just checking in. Emma, Grace said gently, you don't have to carry this alone. The words settled over Emma like a soft comfort, though she knew she could not share the full burden. I know, she whispered. After they ended the call, Emma sat in the dim quiet of her office. The city lights glimmered like distant stars, and in the quiet, she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She wasn't invincible, but she was determined. She opened her laptop and began drafting an emergency strategy. Every piece of evidence needed to be safeguarded, every whistleblower protected. The stakes had risen, but she refused to let fear dictate her next steps. When she finished, the clock read midnight. Her phone buzzed with a message from Alex. They know you're close. Be careful. Emma read the message twice before setting the phone down. She exhaled slowly and whispered to herself, let them come. The fight wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore, it was about resilience. She was prepared for the battle ahead. The scent of roasted vegetables and fresh herbs filled Emma Carter's kitchen as her sister Grace stirred a pot on the stove. Soft music played in the background, a calm contrast to the storm brewing in Emma's mind. Emma sat at the dining table, reviewing documents on her laptop. Her eyes skimmed over case notes and legal briefs, but the words blurred. She had barely slept since receiving Alex's warning. Each second felt like a countdown to something she could not quite see. Grace glanced over her shoulder, noticing Emma's distracted expression. She turned off the burner and walked over, placing a steaming bowl of soup in front of her sister. Okay, Grace said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from Emma. What's going on? Emma closed her laptop with a sigh. Nothing you need to worry about, she replied. Grace arched an eyebrow, her concern unwavering. Emma, you've got that look. The one you get when things are about to go sideways. Emma hesitated, torn between protecting Grace and telling her the truth. Finally, she spoke. We've uncovered more than we expected. Daniels wasn't acting alone. There's a whole network of officers covering for each other, and they've noticed we're closing in. Grace's face paled. Have they threatened you? Emma nodded slowly. There have been signs. We're taking precautions. but I need you to stay alert." Grace reached across the table and squeezed Emma's hand. "You should not be carrying this on your own." "I'm not," Emma assured her. "Alex and the team are with me, but the more progress we make, the more dangerous this gets." Grace's grip tightened. "Then maybe you should step back. Take a break, even just for a few days." Emma shook her head, her jaw set with quiet determination. "If I stop now, everything we've worked for could unravel." Grace sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Just promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," Emma said softly. The sisters finished dinner in relative silence, the weight of their conversation settling in the space between them. Later, as Emma cleared the table, Grace hugged her tightly before heading upstairs. Emma stayed in the kitchen for a moment, letting the hum of the fridge and the ticking of the clock fill the silence. She tried to hold on to the warmth of her home, the faint lavender candle on the windowsill, the framed photos on the wall. This place was her sanctuary, but when she stepped into the hallway, her instincts flared. The lights flickered once, briefly. A soft creak came from the back door, the kind that set her nerves on edge. Emma reached for her phone but found the counter empty. Her heart thudded as she remembered leaving it by the couch earlier. "Looking for this?" The voice was low and unfamiliar. Emma turned slowly. A man in dark clothing stepped out of the shadows near the living room, holding her phone in his hand. He was tall, with a sharp gaze and a faint smirk. Her breath caught in her chest. Before she could react, another man appeared from the hallway near the stairs. He leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed. "Relax," he said with a faint chuckle. "We're not here to hurt anyone, unless we have to." Emma's mind raced. Grace was upstairs, unaware of the danger. She forced herself to stay calm, knowing panic would only make things worse. "What do you want?" Emma asked, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her chest. The first man stepped closer, tossing her phone onto the couch. "We want you to back off, drop the investigation, destroy the files. If you do, this all ends peacefully." Emma met his gaze without flinching. "And if I don't?" The second man's smirk widened. "Then you'll regret it, and so will your sister." Emma's fists clenched at her sides. The thought of Grace being dragged into this war sent a wave of anger surging through her. But she took a steadying breath. She could not afford to lose control. "You've already made a mistake," Emma said calmly. "You came here thinking you could scare me, but all you've done is prove that I'm on to something important." The first man's smirk faltered for a split second before returning. "You think you're untouchable?" "No," Emma replied, taking a step forward. "But I'm not afraid of cowards who sneak into homes instead of facing the truth." The second man pushed off the wall, his expression darkening. "I don't think you understand how this works." A loud crash cut through his sentence, the sound of glass breaking upstairs. Both intruders whipped their heads toward the sound, their confidence wavering. Emma's heart leapt. "Grace." Suddenly, the room flooded with light. A booming voice echoed through the house. "Freeze! Hands in the air!" Two figures stormed through the front door, agents in tactical gear, their weapons raised. The intruders barely had time to react before they were forced to the ground, their wrists pinned behind their backs. Emma didn't move as the chaos unfolded around her. Her breath came in short bursts as she watched the men being restrained. Detective Alex Rivera entered behind the agents, his badge visible as he surveyed the scene. His eyes met Emma's. "I told you to be careful," Alex said, his voice half scolding, half relieved. Emma exhaled slowly, the tension finally releasing from her body. "Thank you," she whispered. Alex nodded, walking toward the staircase. "Is Grace okay?" Emma hurried up the steps and found her sister standing near the broken window, clutching a heavy lamp. Grace's wide eyes filled with relief when she saw Emma. "They didn't touch me," Grace said shakily. I heard them downstairs, and I had to do something." Emma hugged her tightly. "You were brave," she whispered. Downstairs, the intruders were being led out in handcuffs. One of them turned to Emma, sneering. "This isn't over." Emma's gaze hardened. "No," she said, her voice like steel. "It isn't." She watched them disappear into the night as the agents secured the house. When the last officer left, Alex lingered by the door. "They're escalating," Alex warned. "We have to be ready." Emma nodded, her exhaustion replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. "Let them escalate. The more desperate they get, the more mistakes they'll make." Alex's expression softened. "You can't fight this alone, Emma." "I'm not," she said, glancing at Grace, who stood resolutely by her side. Alex nodded. "We'll regroup in the morning." As the house quieted, Emma locked the door behind him and turned to Grace. "We'll be okay," Emma said, though the weight of the fight ahead pressed heavily on her. Grace gave her a faint but determined smile. "I know." The battle was far from over, but in the face of shadows, Emma knew her light would not waver. The morning sun filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow over Emma Carter's living room. Despite the light, the house still felt like a battleground, a silent reminder of the chaos that had unfolded the night before. Emma stood near the door, her hand resting briefly on the deadbolt. She double-checked it, more out of instinct than necessity. In the kitchen, Grace poured 2 cups of coffee, her hands steady, but her expression tight. She set one on the table near Emma, giving her sister a long look. "You didn't sleep," Grace said softly. Emma shook her head, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Neither did you." They sat in silence for a few moments, letting the stillness settle. Emma's thoughts churned, going over the events in loops, the intruders, their threats, and Grace's brave but terrifying act of defiance. Finally, Grace broke the silence. "You need to let someone else step in for a while. You've done more than enough." Emma's gaze remained steady. "If I step away now, they win." Grace leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Emma, they broke into our home. They threatened us. This isn't just a case anymore, it's personal." Emma closed her eyes for a second, the weight of Grace's words pressing on her chest. But when she opened them, her resolve was unshaken. "I know it's personal, and that's why I can't stop." Before Grace could respond, Emma's phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up and saw Alex Rivera's name flashing on the screen. She answered quickly. "Emma," Alex said, his tone serious. "We need you at the press conference. Everyone's gathered." Emma glanced at the clock. She had almost forgotten that today was the day their team would reveal the findings to the public, a crucial moment that could either strengthen their cause or unravel it entirely. "I'll be there," she replied. Grace frowned. "You're really going?" Emma stood, setting her mug down. "I have to." She gave Grace's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Stay here. The security team is outside. You'll be safe." Grace nodded reluctantly, her worry evident. "Just be careful." Emma smiled softly. "I will." The press conference was held in a large courtyard outside the city courthouse. Rows of reporters, legal experts, and community leaders filled the space, their faces a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. Emma stood behind the podium, flanked by her legal team and prominent civil rights attorneys. Alex stood a few feet away, his arms crossed, watching the crowd with a protective gaze. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, but outwardly, she was calm. She adjusted the microphone, then spoke clearly. "Good morning. Thank you for being here," she began. Her voice echoed across the courtyard, strong and resolute. "Today, we are bringing to light the truth behind systemic corruption that has harmed our community for years. This is not just about one officer. This is about accountability at every level." The reporters leaned in, pens poised. Camera lenses zoomed in on Emma's composed face. She gestured to the documents placed on the podium. Our investigation has uncovered a network of misconduct, Emma continued. False arrests, fabricated evidence, and a deliberate effort to silence victims. The officers involved have used their power to oppress rather than protect. She took a breath before continuing. We have compiled indisputable evidence testimonies from whistleblowers, financial records, and internal documents. Today, we are submitting this evidence to an independent oversight committee and calling for a special prosecutor to lead a formal investigation. The crowd stirred, murmurs spreading as Emma's words sank in. A reporter stood up, microphone in hand. Ms. Carter, some are accusing you of entrapment, of orchestrating events to paint these officers in a negative light. How do you respond to those claims? Emma's gaze sharpened. Entrapment? She repeated. The truth isn't something you trap, it's something you uncover. The facts speak for themselves. Our goal is justice, not spectacle. Another reporter jumped in. Are you worried about retaliation? The officers implicated have powerful allies. Emma paused, letting the question hang in the air for a moment. She knew the risks better than anyone. She had felt their weight in her home the night before. Yes, she admitted, her voice steady. I am aware of the risks, but fear has never brought justice. We cannot let threats silence us. If anything, their desperation only proves how much they have to hide. The crowd erupted into a flurry of questions, but Emma held up her hand. We will take questions later. For now, I urge you to listen carefully and review the evidence. This is not just a story, it is a reckoning. She stepped back as her colleague, Margaret Dillard, approached the podium to detail the legal steps they were taking. Emma exhaled slowly, stepping to the side as cameras flashed. Alex joined her, his voice low. You handled that perfectly. Emma nodded, though her mind remained on the weight of the situation. This is only the beginning. Later that afternoon, as Emma drove home, the adrenaline from the press conference began to fade, replaced by exhaustion. The city blurred past her windows, a rush of buildings and sunlight. When she pulled into her driveway, her senses sharpened. A black SUV sat idling near the curb. Its windows were tinted, hiding the driver from view. Emma's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. She could feel the silent threat emanating from the vehicle, a reminder that the people she was fighting had eyes everywhere. She took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, keeping her posture relaxed despite the tension in her chest. The SUV didn't move. Emma calmly walked to her front door and unlocked it, glancing once over her shoulder. The SUV remained parked, like a predator waiting in the shadows. When she stepped inside, Grace appeared from the living room, her face lighting up with relief. "You're back," Grace said, rushing to hug her. Emma hugged her tightly. "I'm fine." Grace pulled back, studying her sister's face. "Are you?" Emma hesitated, then nodded. "I have to be." That night, Emma sat at her desk, reviewing the day's events. Her phone buzzed with a new message. "You should have stayed quiet. This is your last warning." Emma stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. The threats were intensifying, but she refused to be shaken. She closed her laptop and looked toward the soft glow of the living room where Grace sat reading. Despite everything, they still had each other. That alone was reason to keep fighting. Emma whispered to herself, "Let them come." The lines had been drawn, and no matter how hard they pushed, she would not back down. The glow of the city lights stretched across Emma Carter's office windows like a web of quiet energy. The streets below seemed calm, but Emma knew better. Beneath that calm surface, something dangerous stirred. She stared at her reflection-tired eyes, sharp focus, unwavering resolve. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. It was Alex Rivera. "Come up," Emma said before he could speak. Moments later, Alex walked in, carrying a thick folder and a small USB drive. His face was grim, and Emma could tell there was no small talk coming. Alex placed the folder on her desk and leaned against the edge. his eyes meeting hers. "It's worse than we thought." Emma picked up the folder and flipped through the pages. Each document was a new piece of the puzzle bank statements, internal memos, surveillance footage. The deeper she read, the more the web of corruption became clear. Payments exchanged hands between officers, business owners, and even high-ranking officials. "They're protecting each other at every level," Alex said, folding his arms. "We've got transfers linked to private contractors. They're funding cover-ups with money from legal side deals." Emma's stomach twisted as she landed on one particular document, a list of city contracts awarded to a security firm owned by a former police chief. Her voice was quiet, but heavy. "This is systemic," Alex nodded. "They built a fortress to keep themselves untouchable." Emma closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together the next step. "We can't tear this down with just one lawsuit," she said. "We need to expose this publicly, make it impossible for them to hide." Alex hesitated. "I agree. But Emma, they know who you are now. They're not trying to intimidate you anymore. They're trying to eliminate you." Emma's fingers tapped softly against the armrest of her chair. "They sent intruders into my home," she said calmly, "and I'm still standing." Alex's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have to keep proving that." Emma's phone chimed, breaking the moment. It was a text from Grace. "Dinner's waiting. Please don't stay too late." Emma felt a brief but welcome warmth at the sight of the message. Grace had always been her anchor, reminding her of what really mattered. "I'll head home soon," Emma said, though she knew the work would never truly be over. She reached for the USB drive Alex had brought. "What's this?" Alex ran a hand through his hair. "A recording. It's bad." Emma plugged the drive into her laptop and hit play. A grainy video appeared, a private meeting between several officers. Their conversation was casual, but filled with coded admissions of guilt. They discussed quotas for seizures, tactics for silencing complaints, and how to deflect media scrutiny. Then a voice Emma recognized came through the speakers, Officer Daniels. "Carter's too close," Daniels said. "We can't afford another slip-up. If she keeps digging, she'll burn everything down." Emma's breath slowed as she listened. The last voice in the recording was someone new, a man with a low, gravelly tone. "Handle it," he said. "No loose ends." The video ended. The room felt heavier in the silence that followed. Alex's voice was soft but firm. "This is their playbook." Emma stared at the blank screen, the weight of their threats settling over her shoulders. "They're scared," she murmured. "Good." Alex gave her a long look. "Scared people are dangerous, Emma." She nodded, knowing he was right. "We're releasing this," she said. "They've relied on shadows for too long." Later that night, Emma parked her car in the driveway. The house was quiet, its windows glowing with a warm light. She locked the car and took a moment to breathe in the cool night air. But as she stepped onto the porch, she felt it again, that faint shift in the atmosphere, the sense of being watched. Emma turned slowly, scanning the street. For a moment, everything looked normal. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, a lone cat slinked across the sidewalk. Then she saw it, a white sedan parked across the street, its engine running quietly. Emma's pulse quickened, but she kept her face neutral. She turned and unlocked the door, stepping inside as though she had noticed nothing. Grace was waiting in the living room, a blanket draped over her lap. The smell of garlic and rosemary drifted from the kitchen. "You're late," Grace said, though her tone was soft with relief. Emma smiled faintly as she set her keys down. "Work never ends." Grace studied her face. "You saw something, didn't you?" Emma hesitated before nodding. "There was a car outside." Grace's expression tightened. "Emma?" "I know," Emma said, sitting beside her. "But we're not running." Grace reached for Emma's hand. "Then we fight smart." Emma squeezed her sister's hand. "We will." Hours later, the house was dark and still. Emma sat at her desk, the recording Alex had brought playing softly in her headphones as she listened to it again and again, memorizing every detail. A soft creak made her freeze. She pulled off her headphones and listened carefully. The sound came again from the back of the house. Emma's heart began to pound. She reached for her phone but remembered she had left it charging in the kitchen. A shadow shifted in the hallway. Someone was inside. Emma's instincts kicked in. She rose slowly, her bare feet silent against the floor. She grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from the desk, holding it tightly. As she stepped into the hallway, a figure lunged toward her. Emma swung the paperweight with all her strength. It connected with a dull thud, and the intruder staggered back, cursing. "Grace!" Emma shouted. "Get out now!" Grace's footsteps pounded upstairs. Emma heard her sister slam the bedroom door, locking it. The second intruder appeared, grabbing for Emma's arm. She twisted away, landing a sharp kick to his leg. He stumbled, but his grip tightened. Suddenly, the house flooded with blinding light. "Federal agents! Drop your weapons!" Voices and footsteps filled the house as agents in tactical gear stormed in. The intruders froze, their hands in the air. Within seconds, they were restrained and dragged toward the door. Emma staggered back, catching her breath as Alex appeared, his expression grim. "You all right?" he asked. Emma nodded shakily. "Grace?" "She's safe," Alex assured her. Emma leaned against the wall as the chaos subsided. The adrenaline still coursed through her veins, but a new fire burned in her chest. She met Alex's eyes. "They're done hiding." Alex's gaze was steady. "So are we." The dawn was breaking as the last of the federal agents cleared Emma Carter's house. The soft hues of morning light spilled through the windows, but the house felt heavy, each room marked by the memory of shadows that had lingered too long. Emma stood by the kitchen counter, her arms folded tightly as Alex Rivera finished a call with the lead agent. "They're in custody," Alex said, slipping his phone back into his jacket. "But you know this isn't the end." Emma nodded, exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders. "No," she replied quietly, "it's not." Upstairs, Grace sat on her bed, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale but calm. When Emma walked into the room, Grace looked up, her eyes wide with lingering fear. "They came here," Grace whispered. "They really came here." Emma sat beside her, pulling her sister into a tight embrace. "We're safe now," she murmured. Grace pulled back slightly, searching Emma's face. "But for how long?" Emma's jaw tightened. "As long as it takes." She took Grace's hands in hers. "You're going to stay somewhere else for a while. It's the safest option." Grace shook her head. "No, Emma." "This isn't up for debate," Emma said, her voice soft but unyielding. "Please, I can't focus if I'm worried about you." Grace's shoulders slumped, and after a moment, she nodded reluctantly. "All right." An hour later, Emma watched from the porch as a black SUV pulled up. Two agents stepped out, offering nods of reassurance as they helped Grace into the back seat. Grace gave Emma a weak smile through the window. Emma forced herself to smile back, though her heart felt heavy as the SUV pulled away. The house felt unbearably quiet as soon as it disappeared down the street. Alex appeared at the door behind her. "I'll make sure they have eyes on her the whole time," he said. Emma nodded. "I know." She exhaled slowly. "It's time to push everything forward." Alex's brow furrowed. "You mean the documentary?" Emma's eyes were steady. "Yes. The public needs to see exactly what we're up against." Alex hesitated. "Emma, the threats are escalating. They're not just going after you. They're targeting your family." "That's exactly why we can't wait," Emma said. "We have the evidence, the whistleblowers, and now the proof that they'll do anything to cover this up." She paused, then added quietly, "If we don't act now, more people will be hurt." Alex stared at her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's make it happen." The next day, Emma's team gathered in a secure office space. The atmosphere was electric, with both determination and tension. Margaret Dillard, the lead attorney in their coalition, set a stack of documents on the table. "We're moving forward with the release," she said, "but we need to be prepared. This is going to hit them like a freight train." Isaac Green, a young, fiery lawyer, leaned forward. "Good. Let them scramble. The more desperate they get, the more mistakes they'll make." Sarah Patel, the strategist of the group, tapped her pen against the table thoughtfully. "We need to control the narrative," she said. "If they twist this in the media, they could paint Emma as reckless or worse." Emma met Sarah's gaze. "Then we'll get ahead of them. We'll release the documentary and hold a live press conference. If they want to challenge the truth, let them try." Margaret nodded. "The whistleblowers are ready. We've secured statements and ensured their safety for now." "For now," Sarah echoed. "But what about when this goes public? They'll need more protection." Emma's face hardened. "We'll make sure they're covered." Margaret studied Emma, her expression both impressed and concerned. "You're not backing down, are you?" Emma's eyes didn't waver. "No." That evening, Emma sat in front of the camera in a small recording studio. The room was simple, no flashy lights, just a microphone and a camera aimed at her. Alex stood nearby, watching with quiet focus. Emma took a steadying breath as the director signaled for her to begin. "My name is Emma Carter," she began, her voice clear and resolute. "For too long, those sworn to protect us have abused their power. But today, we're pulling back the curtain." Her words flowed steadily as she outlined the key points of their investigation: the falsified reports, the illegal seizures, the intimidation tactics. She spoke of the families who had been affected, their lives upended by corruption and cruelty. "This isn't just a story about one officer or one department," Emma said, her gaze unwavering. "This is about accountability for every person who has ever been silenced, for every life that has been destroyed in the shadows. We will not be quiet anymore." The room was silent when she finished. Alex gave her a nod of approval. The next morning, the documentary was released online. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. Community leaders, civil rights organizations, and even national news outlets picked it up. Social media lit up with hashtags demanding justice. But Emma knew that with every supporter they gained, their enemies would push back even harder. By mid-afternoon, her phone rang with an urgent call from Margaret. "Emma," Margaret said, her tone sharp, "there's been a leak. Someone tipped off the network. One of the whistleblowers has gone silent." Emma felt her stomach drop. "Are they safe?" "We don't know yet," Margaret admitted. "We're trying to track them down." Emma's hands tightened around the phone. "Then we move faster. No more waiting." Margaret hesitated. "This could be dangerous." Emma's voice was firm. "It's already dangerous. But if we stop now, everything we've fought for will fall apart." There was a pause. Then Margaret spoke. "All right, we're with you." That night, Emma stood on her porch, looking out at the quiet street. The events of the day had worn her down, but the fire in her heart had only grown stronger. The fight had escalated, but she wasn't backing down. She whispered to herself, "We're just getting started." In the distance, she could hear the hum of an approaching car, but this time, she wasn't afraid. Whatever came next, she was ready. The night air was crisp as Emma Carter stepped back into her home, locking the door behind her. The events of the day weighed heavily on her, but she knew there was no time to rest. The release of the documentary had shifted the public narrative. Social media was buzzing with calls for justice, and news stations replayed clips of her speech on a loop. The tide was turning, but the risks had grown with every passing hour. Emma's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Alex Rivera. She answered on the second ring. "We found the missing whistleblower," Alex said without preamble. Emma's heart jumped. "Is he safe?" "For now," Alex replied. He's scared out of his mind, though. They paid him a visit, a warning to keep quiet. We're moving him to a safe house tonight. Emma exhaled slowly, her grip tightening on the phone. Good. Make sure he's protected. We will, Alex assured her. There was a pause before he added, Emma, we've had another problem. One of the whistleblowers was arrested today. The charges are bogus tampering with evidence, resisting arrest. It's retaliation. Emma closed her eyes, anger simmering beneath her exhaustion. They're trying to discredit him, she said. They're desperate. Alex's voice was grave. Desperate people do dangerous things. Emma opened her eyes, her focus sharpening. Then we'll hit back harder. The press conference is still on for tomorrow. We won't let them control the narrative. Alex hesitated. You know they're watching you. This press conference makes you an even bigger target. Emma's voice was steady. Let them watch. The following morning, Emma arrived at the courthouse steps, dressed in a tailored black suit that projected authority and calm. A podium had been set up, surrounded by reporters and cameras. The crowd was larger than expected. Community members, activists, and curious onlookers filled the square, waiting to hear what Emma and her team had to say. Margaret Dillard stood at Emma's side, reviewing notes, while Alex scanned the crowd, his eyes sharp for anything suspicious. You ready for this? Margaret asked quietly. Emma met her gaze. More than ever. The murmurs of the crowd quieted as Emma stepped up to the microphone. She adjusted the height, took a breath, and began. Yesterday, we shared the truth about a system built on silence and fear, Emma said, her voice carrying over the square. Today, I stand before you again not just as an attorney, but as a representative of those who've suffered under that system. She paused, letting her words settle. Since the release of our findings, there has been retaliation against whistleblowers, against victims, but intimidation will not erase the truth. Emma's gaze swept over the crowd. To those who believe they can bury this through fear, know this: you cannot silence justice. The crowd murmured in agreement, applause rippling through the square. Emma gestured to Margaret, who stepped forward with documents. We are calling for immediate action, an independent investigation led by a special prosecutor. We are not here to destroy, but to rebuild trust. The cameras zoomed in as Margaret held up the signed petition. Reporters shouted questions, but Emma remained composed, answering each one with precision. Then, a sharp commotion erupted near the back of the crowd. Emma's attention snapped toward the noise. A man in a dark coat was shouting, pushing through the reporters. He was holding something, a small black object. Alex was already moving, his hand on the concealed weapon at his side. Get back! Alex shouted to the crowd, stepping between Emma and the commotion. Security swarmed, and the man was tackled to the ground. The black object fell and clattered just a phone. Emma's heartbeat thundered in her ears. The crowd broke into chaos, cameras flashing wildly as security agents subdued the man. Let's get you out of here, Alex said, his voice urgent as he ushered Emma away from the podium. Emma shook her head. No, not yet. Emma? She turned back to the crowd, her voice rising above the chaos. This is what fear looks like, she called out, silencing the crowd. But we will not be afraid. We will not back down. The noise softened as people refocused on her. Emma's hands gripped the edge of the podium. This moment belongs to those who've been ignored, dismissed, and silenced, she said. Today, we speak louder than ever. Applause erupted, louder than before. The crowd surged with renewed energy, chanting her name. Alex's eyes softened as he watched her regain control of the moment. By late afternoon, the press conference was the top story across every news outlet. Interviews with community leaders praised Emma's resolve. Whistleblowers' stories were being shared widely, sparking calls for greater accountability. But not everyone was pleased. Emma returned to her office, where Sarah Patel was waiting, her face grim. "You've seen it?" Sarah asked, holding up a tablet displaying a news feed. Emma scanned the screen. The headline read, "Opposition accuses Carter of endangering public safety." Emma's jaw clenched. "Of course! They're spinning it." Sarah nodded. "They're painting you as reckless, saying the disruption at the press conference proves you're inciting chaos." Emma sat down, her mind already working. "We expected this," she said, "but we stay ahead. We'll release follow-ups with victim statements and verified evidence. We show the public why this fight matters." Sarah's gaze softened. "You're doing everything right. Just don't forget to take care of yourself." Emma gave a faint smile. "I'm trying." That evening, Emma returned home. The house was quiet, almost eerily so, without Grace's presence. Emma poured herself a glass of water and sank into the couch. Her phone buzzed with a new text message from an unknown number. "We warned you. Last chance to walk away." Emma stared at the message, the weight of the words pressing against her. But instead of fear, she felt something else resolve. She deleted the message and set the phone down. The fire in her heart burned stronger than ever. They wanted her to break. Instead, she would rise. She whispered to herself, "The truth will win." Outside, the city hummed with life, and Emma knew that this fight was far from over. But as long as she had breath, she would keep pushing forward for herself, for Grace, and for the countless voices that had been silenced for too long. The early morning air was cool as Emma Carter stepped out of her car and walked toward the courthouse steps. The weight of everything she had endured settled on her shoulders, but she felt no hesitation. Today was the day they would expose the truth in full view of the world live, with no room for corruption to spin its lies. Alex Rivera was already there, leaning against a metal barricade near the crowd. He nodded as Emma approached. His sharp eyes swept the area, scanning for anything suspicious. The tension was palpable. "You sure about this?" Alex asked quietly. "They'll do anything to stop you." Emma met his gaze, steady and calm. "That's exactly why we have to do this." Behind them, Margaret Dillard and the legal team were reviewing their notes. The whistleblowers were in a private room nearby, ready to testify through a secure video feed. Security agents lined the perimeter, watching for any sign of trouble. The courthouse steps were lined with reporters and members of the public. The documentary's release had sparked a national conversation, and today, everyone was watching. Emma could feel the weight of their hope and their doubts. She stepped up to the podium, the courthouse behind her, a towering reminder of the justice she was fighting for. The cameras zoomed in, and the crowd hushed as Emma adjusted the microphone. "My name is Emma Carter," she began, her voice unwavering. "Today, we are here to demand transparency and accountability." She paused, letting her words sink in. For too long, this system has operated in shadows. People have been silenced, lives destroyed, and justice denied. But today, we shine a light. She turned to the large screen set up beside the podium. With a nod to Alex, the live feed began playing the footage they had gathered over months of investigation. Clips of officers falsifying reports, confiscating property, and intimidating civilians played for all to see. The crowd murmured as each damning image flashed across the screen. Then came the recordings from the whistleblowers' officers who had risked everything to tell the truth. Their voices filled the square, their faces blurred for anonymity. One by one, they recounted the corruption they had witnessed. The final clip played Officer Daniels's voice, clear and unmistakable. "Carter's too close. Handle it. No loose ends." The crowd erupted into gasps and murmurs. Reporters typed furiously, and camera shutters clicked. Emma let the noise swell before she raised her hand, calling for quiet. "This is not just a fight against a few bad actors," Emma said. "This is about restoring faith in the institutions that are meant to serve us. It's about making sure that no one else has to live in fear of the people sworn to protect them." Applause broke out loud, fierce, and unrelenting. Margaret stepped forward, holding up the formal request for a special prosecutor. The cameras captured every moment as she handed it to the federal oversight representative standing nearby. The representative took the documents, his expression unreadable, but Emma knew they had done everything they could. The truth was out now, impossible to ignore. But as Emma turned to step away from the podium, a sudden, sharp sound rang out, a metallic clatter. Alex's voice cut through the chaos. "Down!" Before Emma could fully react, Alex was in front of her, pulling her behind the podium. Security agents swarmed, shouting orders. The crowd screamed and scattered. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she crouched behind the wooden structure. She felt Alex's hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring. "It's okay," Alex whispered. "You're safe." Seconds passed like hours as the agents secured the area. Finally, one of them called out, "Clear!" Emma took a deep breath and stood, brushing off her suit. The crowd was still tense, but many had stopped fleeing, watching her with wide eyes. She stepped back up to the microphone. Her voice was calm but fierce. "You just saw fear in action, but we will not be afraid." The crowd began to return, slowly at first, then in waves. Applause broke out again, louder this time, a show of solidarity. Alex stood beside her, his eyes scanning the crowd for any lingering threats. "You sure know how to make a statement," he muttered, shaking his head. Emma allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes the truth has to be louder than the fear. By the time the press conference ended, the internet was ablaze. Every major news outlet was covering the event, and the live broadcast had gone viral. Messages of support flooded social media, photos of the crowd standing their ground, videos of Emma refusing to be silenced. But Emma knew the hardest part was still ahead. That evening, Emma sat in her office as Margaret, Alex, and the rest of the team reviewed the next steps. "We've put the pressure on," Margaret said, "but they'll push back harder. There's no going back now." Emma nodded. "Good. Let them. The more desperate they get, the more they'll expose themselves." Alex crossed his arms. "We need to be ready for anything." "We will be," Emma said. "We've already won the first battle. We got the truth out. Now we make sure it sticks." Margaret gave Emma a long look. "You've done something incredible, Emma. But you need to remember you can't carry this fight alone." Emma met her gaze, her voice soft but firm. "I'm not alone. I have all of you." That night, Emma walked to her balcony, looking out over the city. The lights stretched out like constellations, each one representing a life, a story worth fighting for. Her phone buzzed with a message from Grace. "You were amazing today. I'm so proud of you." Emma smiled as she typed back, "I couldn't do it without you." The wind tugged at her hair as she leaned on the railing, her heart full despite the weight of everything that had happened. The battle wasn't over, but today had proved something important, that when people stand together, the truth becomes unstoppable. She closed her eyes, inhaling the night air. The fight ahead was still long, but Emma had never felt stronger. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, but for now, she allowed herself a moment of peace, a reminder of why she fought. The truth was out, and hope was on the horizon. The early morning sun bathed the city in a soft, golden light. Emma Carter sat on the front steps of her home, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. For the first time in weeks, the morning felt calm. Birds chirped in the distance, and a gentle breeze stirred the trees lining the quiet street. She took a slow sip, savoring the warmth and stillness. After everything, the threats, the sleepless nights, the relentless pressure, this moment felt earned. But beneath the calm, she knew the battle wasn't over. It had only reached a turning point. The sound of a car door closing drew Emma's attention. She stood as the familiar black SUV pulled into the driveway. Grace stepped out, her face lighting up when she saw her sister. "You didn't have to come get me," Grace said as she walked up the path, wrapping Emma in a hug. I couldn't wait to have you back home, Emma replied, squeezing her tightly. Grace pulled back, her eyes searching Emma's face. You've barely slept, haven't you? Emma chuckled softly. A couple of hours, but it's fine. Today's a good day. Grace nodded, though her expression remained serious. You've done something incredible, Emma, but you need to take a break, at least for a little while. Emma smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Grace's face. I will, but first, I need to see this through. Later that morning, Emma arrived at her office. The once quiet lobby was now buzzing with reporters and community members waiting for updates. She nodded at Alex Rivera, who was already there, speaking to Margaret and the other attorneys. Welcome back, boss, Alex said with a faint smile. The city's talking about nothing else. Emma's gaze swept over the gathered crowd. Good. The more people watching, the harder it'll be for them to hide. Margaret stepped forward, holding up a thick file of papers. We've received formal confirmation the special prosecutor has been approved. The Department of Internal Oversight is launching a full investigation. Emma felt her breath catch for just a moment. It was what they'd fought so hard for, a real chance at accountability. That's incredible, Emma said, though she tempered her excitement with caution. But we need to stay vigilant. They'll still try to protect themselves, Margaret nodded. Agreed, but for the first time, the system is working for us instead of against us. Alex placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. You've done it, he said. This is the moment you've been fighting for. Emma exhaled slowly, letting herself feel the weight of their progress. That afternoon, Emma and Grace walked through their neighborhood together. The sidewalks bustled with life kids on bicycles, neighbors chatting by their gardens. Emma's presence drew nods and waves from people who had once regarded her with quiet curiosity, but now looked at her with admiration. Miss Carter, a woman called out, walking briskly across the street. She was in her late 50s, wearing a bright yellow scarf. I've been following your story. I just wanted to say, thank you. Emma paused, a little surprised. You're welcome. The woman's eyes glistened. My son was arrested unfairly last year. No one would listen to us. But because of you, people are starting to care. Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. I'm so sorry for what you've been through, she said. And I promise, this isn't the end. We're working to make sure no one else has to experience that. The woman nodded, wiping her eyes. It means more than you know. She patted Emma's hand before heading back to her house. Grace watched the interaction, her expression soft. That's why you do this, isn't it? Emma nodded. It's always been about more than just one case. They continued their walk, the warm afternoon sun casting long shadows behind them. The final hearing to review the findings from Emma's investigation was held a month later. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with reporters, legal experts, and community members. Emma sat beside Margaret and Alex, her hands resting on the polished oak table. The judge's gavel struck, calling the room to order. A panel of officials reviewed the evidence, asking questions and scrutinizing every detail. But there was no denying the truth. After hours of deliberation, the judge spoke clearly. Based on the overwhelming evidence, this court finds sufficient cause to proceed with indictments against the officers and officials named in this investigation. The room broke into murmurs, but Emma heard none of it. Her heart pounded in her chest as relief washed over her. The system had finally acknowledged the truth. Outside the courthouse, a large crowd gathered, holding signs calling for justice. Emma stepped to the podium once more, feeling the weight of the moment. This is not just a victory for us, she said, her voice steady and sure. This is a victory for everyone who has ever felt unheard, unseen, and unprotected. Today, we proved that the truth can't be buried and that justice is possible when we stand together. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Emma felt Alex step up beside her, giving her a nod. Margaret joined her, followed by the whistleblowers who had risked everything. For the first time in months, Emma allowed herself a moment of pride not for herself, but for the people whose courage had carried this movement. That evening, Emma returned home. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, and the city felt quieter somehow. She sat on her balcony, watching the horizon. Grace joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. They sat together in comfortable silence. "You did it," Grace said after a while, her voice soft. "You really did it." Emma smiled, the weight on her shoulders finally easing. "We did it," she corrected. Grace raised her cup in a toast. To resilience. Emma raised hers as well. And to hope. As the sun dipped below the skyline, Emma felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead would still be long, but she had learned that darkness couldn't withstand the light of truth. No matter how fierce the storm, there was always a new dawn. Emma Carter's journey wasn't just a story about justice, it was a story about resilience, courage, and the power of standing up for what's right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. She fought not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced, proving that when people come together, the truth can't be buried. No matter how dark things seemed, the light of hope and kindness found a way to break through. And like Emma, we are reminded that real change begins with a single step and a refusal to back down. If this story inspired you and reminded you of the importance of justice, compassion, and perseverance, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. We share powerful narratives of hope and resilience that show how everyday heroes can make a difference. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us on this journey, because the world needs more stories that shine a light in the darkness. Thank you for being part of this story. Together, we can be the change.